Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next roundtable with Republic Underground. Today, our event is a special commemoration of the Khojaly Massacre. The Khojaly Massacre is one of the bloodiest episodes in Azerbaijan's history. It took place in the early 1990s when the Armenian troops entered the country and massacred hundreds of innocent civilians of all religious and ethnic backgrounds in the town of Khojaly. According to BBC and other Western sources, approximately 600 uh, people died the day. However, Azerbaijan's side of the story is quite frankly significantly higher. Over 1,000 people are reported to have been killed as a result of a horrific torture, rape, and murder spree that took place in February 1992. It was a cold, snowy night. The Khojaly township was a small, close-knit community. They were attacked suddenly um, by the Armenian troops. Many people have disappeared and went missing and were never recovered. And since then, there has been no justice brought to the victims of this horrific attack. No one stood trial for these events. In fact, according to some sources, some of the Armenians who were involved in these events actually received commendations from the government. Um, this was the final episode following a long, a long sordid drama that involved the Soviet backing in trying to keep Azerbaijan dependent on Moscow. Uh, the Soviet Union had backed Armenian tensions with Azerbaijan. It had backed past attacks prior to this event. Just last month, we marked Black January, which involved a Soviet invasion of Baku and massacre of civilians. Um, that had actually led to creating an independence movement in Azerbaijan that led to Azerbaijan actually breaking away and becoming an independent country. But unfortunately, this has also led to the first Karabakh War, and this massacre, the Khojaly massacre, marks the beginning of a war that turned into nearly 30 years of occupation, and which was recently put an end to in the 44-day war, which liberated the territories that had been occupied for most of that time. We will begin today's program with a moment of silence in commemoration of everyone who has suffered. And following that, I will introduce the speakers and their program. So 1 minute of silence, please. Thank you. Today with us, we have a survivor, the survivor of the massacre, who will tell her story in Azerbaijani, and I will translate it to English. Yasmin Hasanova. We have Mr. Irina Tsukerman, who is a former political advisor to the European Parliament. We have Mr. Raul Lori Contreras, a political consultant, author of over 20 books, an expert on Khojaly, who had written a book about that as well. We have Arzu Jaid, the Azerbaijani diaspora youth member in the US and an independent journalist. And we have Mr. Javier Medina Ortiz, a Spanish lawyer, founder of Casa de Azerbaijan, the Azerbaijan House in Spain, who has also hosted events related to this topic. Um, each of the guests will have an opportunity to make brief remarks about themselves, their experiences and involvement with Azerbaijan and with Khojaly. And but before that, we will feature a video that has been kindly provided to us by Mr. Tamar Skolts, a renowned journalist who had also personally interviewed survivors of the massacre and had written about Khojaly, one of the very few Westerners to do so. Following the presentation, I will raise some questions with the speakers, those of them who will be available, and we will also accept some comments from the audience, which can be sent to the Facebook link comments section. So we will actually start with the video now, and from then on I'll introduce each speaker and following that have a discussion. Apologies, there seems to be a technical issue with the sound. We're trying to get it resolved.
British independent newspaper. You've got to understand that someone like me, who was a Middle East correspondent, happened to be in Turkey, I was not used to the Soviet reality. I mean, I remember that I got to the Karabakh front for the first time in January, but during that time, I at one point took a train from Baku to Grozny because someone had told me there was trouble brewing there too. But I had no idea that Grozny was actually in Russia. I thought all these republics were roughly the same. I couldn't tell you the difference between the Autonomous Republic of Karabakh or the Republic of Azerbaijan or the Republic of Chechnya. It was all obscure to us. And so I think we didn't do that great a job in explaining to people exactly what was going on. I do remember the complete disorganization of the Azerbaijani forces, the sense when you interview the leaders, like I remember interviewing President Mutalibov once, it ended up that because I'd been to the front line and he hadn't, he kept asking me questions about what was going on instead of me asking the president of Azerbaijan questions about what was going on.
And what was going on the Karabakh front was getting worse day by day, especially at a place called Khojaly. I made my last trip to the doomed town in late January aboard an overcrowded helicopter. It was bringing in desperately needed supplies and bringing out desperate people. A few weeks later, the hammer fell, as expected. Acting on a tip, I went out to the city of Agdam on the morning of February 26th and was stunned by what I saw. It's called the Khojaly Massacre. It happened on the evening of February 25th, 26th, 1992, where a little town was surrounded and basically ethnically cleansed with 613 people, mainly women and children, killed that night. I was not present there. I was at a place called Agdam, about maybe 10, 12 miles away. And when the first stream of survivors and refugees came stumbling in with just these amazingly horrible stories of torture, sadism, and general mayhem. And that was the night that Aleph was killed. But I was not in the town at the time. I had visited it on numerous times. That's how I knew all these people coming out, and I knew they weren't lying to me. I broke the Khojaly story. It took me hours trying to convince my editors at the Washington Post that it had been the Armenians slaughtering Azerbaijanis and not the other way around.
Well, I covered the aftermath of Khojaly as a journalist for the Times. We were there together, based in Agdam, on the Azeri side of the lines, and then flown in by helicopter to see the bodies up in the hills. It was always entirely clear to me that the Armenians were engaged in a program of ethnic cleansing. Exactly how so many people came to be killed in the process is, to me at least, still not entirely clear. The extent to which this was a systematic massacre and the extent to which it was, shall we say, over-enthusiastic use of force in the context of some sort of running fight. What was entirely clear was that a large number of women and children had been killed in the process, and that a considerable number of the bodies I saw had been killed at close range.
There too was the Paris-based photojournalist Reza Degati.
They were waiting in Agdam Square, near a mall, waiting the Red Cross, bringing the bodies. And then they were going and look to your families, to your father, to your sons, to your husbands. For days and days, those women waiting there. And every time when the bodies were brought by the Red Cross, you knew that some of them were going to come. And this woman, the particular woman, was there for 3 days and going around. And every time all the other women, they were finding their relatives and they were in a sorrow. She was the one who was going to say, okay, don't worry, and trying to reconcile. Then suddenly, I saw her running to me, to my camera, and crying, saying that, gel, gördüm, gözleri yok. I find my son, I find my husband, but they have no eyes. Can you imagine?
Years later, the picture of the wailing woman came back to haunt Rizat. It was 2010, and he had been asked by the municipal government of Paris to mount a 30-year retrospective on his work, ranging from Afghanistan to South Africa. He included the portrait of and added some.
This is the picture, one picture I put in the book somewhere, and I wrote about it. A couple of weeks after, Armenian ambassador himself wanted to talk to me and invite me to have lunch with him. During the lunch, little by little, Mr. Ambassador, this is what was coming of his conversation with this lunch, that the massacre was not done by Armenia, was Azerbaijani or Afghani was done the massacres, that all these people that I have seen, they were all fabricated and theater players. Then come up that you are only one man talking about Azerbaijan and France. We are 500,000 Armenians. And I answered to him, Mr. Ambassador, I think that you have read my life, my works. I have been in prison for my thoughts and telling the truth in the Shah Times for 3 years. I have been tortured for 5 months because I was telling the truth. You know, Mr. Ambassador, 500,000, no, 500 million people, they cannot stop me saying the truth. And you know what they did? They were coming every day. The record of the metro was 27 times. They have sent people writings, slogan against me. One day I got a call from the metro saying that, hey, we are sorry, but they have come and they turned off the caption. I couldn't believe doing this in the center of Paris. And I went to see with my eyes. And when I saw it was really, it was a huge wound on my soul, which still I have it. Because then I realized if those people, they cannot tolerate a little text in the center of Paris in exhibition and then tear it off, what they are doing to the people in Azerbaijan, the journalist, the poet, the writer, that write one sentence against them. You understand?
The year 2012 marks the 20th anniversary of the Khojaly Massacre. Much has changed in Azerbaijan, but Khojaly cannot be forgotten. Annual meetings and commemorations have been held everywhere from Mexico City to Moscow, and even in the House of Lords in London. Today, many Azerbaijanis demand international recognition of the events of February 25th as a genocide. But I and most true friends of Azerbaijan disagree. We choose to label the bloody events of that night as a massacre, and that is horrible enough.
Oh là là.
Well, that was quite a sobering perspective on the events. I was actually in the area of Khojaly in 2018. That was, of course, before the Liberation War, and at the time, everything about it was very real because there were still live conflicts. There were still civilians being killed in the vicinity. Now we are looking at a situation where we can commemorate the event, but also look towards a different future, and that's kind of the theme of today's commemoration. We have an opportunity to not just look towards the past, but to see how it can be used to create a better future for the region. But understanding the past first is the first step towards building that future. With that in mind, I give the word to Yasemin, who will share her experience as a survivor of those events in Azerbaijani, and then I will read the English version for everyone in the audience. Yasemin, the floor is yours. You can go.
Yasemin xanım, mikrofonunuzu açın. Növbə sizinlə danışmaq.
Həsənova Yasemin, Tofiq qızı. 1980-ci ildə Xocalıda anadan olmuşam. 12 yaşımda bəşəriyyətin qanlı faciəsi olan Khojaly soyqırımının dəhşətli günlərini yaşadım. Bu qırğında atam Azərbaycanın milli qəhrəmanı Tofiqi, anamı, nənəmi, babalarımı, əmimi, bibimi, xalamı və xalamın 2 övladını itirdim. Bu dəhşətli soyqırım əlbəttə mənim uşaqlığımı əlimdən aldı. Az yaşımda böyük bir faciə yaşadım. Yaxınlarımın itkisiyle barışa bilmədim. Sizcə bir gecədə həm valideynlərini, həm qohumlarını, sevdiklərini itirmək nə deməkdir? Bir gecədə günahsız insanları öldürmək bir millətə qarşı yalnız etnik təmizləmə siyasəti idi. Haqlıyam, elə deyilmi? İndi 41 yaşım var. Bu faciə ilə böyüdüm. 29 ildir ki, valideyn sevgisinin nə olduğunu bilmirəm. Xocalı haqqında çox yazılıb və deyilib, ancaq dünya ölkələrindən və beynəlxalq təşkilatlardan hələ də lazımi dəyəri və qiyməti görmürük. Dünya gücləri və beynəlxalq təşkilatlar bu faciəyə nə biganə qalmalı, nə də susmalıdır. Ədalət öz yerini tapmalıdır. Cinayətkarlar cəzalandırılmalıdır. Son 29 il ərzində hər gün valideynlərimin və yaxınlarımın hər gün qayıdacağını ümid edirəm. Amma faciədən 16 il sonra anamın qətlə yetirildiyini öyrəndim. Bu xəbər məni kədərləndirsə də, anamın ermənilərə əsir düşməməsinə çox sevindim. Çünki onlar qocaları, qadınları, körpələri amansızcasına qətlə yetirirdilər. Bu faciə mənim kimi yüzlərlə Qarabağdan olan uşaqlar yaşayıb, bu faciəni yaşadılar. Mənim kimi valideyni itirən minlərlə uşaqlar bu dərdin ağırlığında böyüdülər. Mənim yaşadığım bu dəhşət, bu qeyri, soyqırımı bütün dünyaya yanaşmağa çağırdı. Bugün isə mən həm kədərli, eyni zamanda da qürurluyam. 29 il sonra güclü və qəhrəman ordumuz sayəsində işğal olunmuş ərazilərimizi azad etdik. Hər şeydən əvvəl bu qələbəni bizə təqdim edən Ali Baş Komandanımıza, Cənab İlham Əliyevə və güclü ordumuza minnətdaram. Dövlətimə minnətdaram. I finished.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. I am going to translate your comments just now from the text. I'm Kasanova Yasemin. I was born in 1980 in the state of Khojaly. When I was 12, I experienced the terrible days of the Khojaly genocide, a bloody tragedy of mankind. In this massacre, I lost my father, the national hero of Azerbaijan, Hussein of Tawfiq, my mother, grandparents, uncle, aunts, and my aunt's 2 kids. Horrible genocide took away my childhood. When I was young, I experienced a great tragedy I could not reconcile with the loss of my relatives. What do you think it means to lose both parents, relatives, and loved ones in one night? Killing innocent people at the overnight was a policy of ethnic cleansing against a nation. Am I right? Now I'm 41 years old. I grew up with this tragedy. For 29 years, I do not know what parental love is. Much has been written and said about Khojaly, however, we still do not see the necessary value from the world, countries, and international organizations. World powers and international organizations should neither be indifferent nor silent to this tragedy. Justice must find its place. Criminals must be punished. During the last 29 years, each day, I hope my parents and my loved ones would come back every day, but 16 years after the tragedy, I learned that my mother had been murdered. Although this news saddened me, I was glad that my mother was not captured by the Armenians, because Armenians were ruthlessly killing the elderly, women, and children. Hundreds of children from Karabakh, like me, are living through this tragedy. Thousands of children like me, who have lost their parents, have grown up in the weight of this pain. I call on the world countries to take a fair approach to this horror and inhuman genocide that we live. Today, I am sad and proud at the same time. After 29 years, thanks to a strong and heroic army, we liberated our occupied territory. First of all, I'm very grateful to our Supreme Commander, Ilham Aliyev, to our strong army, state, and people who gave us this victory. There's not much I can add to that, and it's absolutely a complete horror, and it is indeed Suddenly, it's disconcerting that no one was brought to justice for these events, and that people had to live for decades even without being able to properly grieve for their families. And I'm hoping that this process of healing can start with the restoration of these events, a sense of some sort of a return to normalcy. You can never come back to exactly the way things were before that, but you can start healing. These sort of events, I hope, can help survivors move to a better stage of their lives. And with that, I want to give the floor to Mr. Irina Tsukerman, who had with his experience in the European Parliament, can give us a bit of a comment on the political aspect of these events and how he views them from his perspective.
Hello? Vous m'écoutez? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
May I start?
Yes, please.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Just first of all, I'm sorry for my very, very bad English language. I've just forgotten the English because I've just worked for 35 years in French and Italian. So I just I say before, sorry for my bad English. But anyway, I will try to explain as well. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation and this opportunity to give me give my modest opinion on this very sensitive subject. My name, I introduce myself. My name is Rino Trombetta. I'm a former political advisor for foreign affairs in the European Parliament. In my professional activity, I also had the role of political advisor in the Euronest Joint Assembly, Eastern Partnership, the Parliamentary Assembly composed of members of the European Parliament and members of the Parliament of Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, Azerbaijan and Armenia. In this context, I looked for information, check it out, in order to get a better view of a real situation, to get my own opinion, and then to draw up the report related to my activity. And I think that every single person who goes deeper to understand the situation in South Caucasus will certainly find out that Azerbaijan was always the victim of Armenian military aggression. But now I would like to stay on the topic of this meeting. I want to talk about this question, the dramatic question of Khojaly. We know the dramatic story. On February 1992, the Khojaly tragedy was the mass murder of Azerbaijani civilians by Armenian armed force and the 366 Soviet army in the town of Khojaly on 26 February 1992. The death toll is 613 civilians, including 106 women and 63 children. The elder people, sick and wounded civilians were massacred. Khojaly city was already destroyed by bombing and caused a massacre among the population who had not managed to escape earlier. The event became the largest massacre in South Caucasus. Over 1,300 people were arrested. because of the manner and atrocity carried out, the Khojaly massacre was an act of ethnic cleansing to neutralize any will to resist on the part of the civilian population and to block the Azeri military reaction. And there is also an assumption of responsibility in the statement of the Armenian defense minister of that time, Mr. Sarkisian or Sarkisian, who become later president of the Armenian Republic, who said at that time, before the event of Khojaly, the Azeris thought that the Armenians were not capable of putting their hand on the civilian population. We had removed all duty. And it's my opinion, my personal opinion, okay, that of course, war is war. It produces horror, but yes, it has its own rule. No one has yet invented a gentle war with good manners. But in this case, there is a full and total violation of every treaty and the international convention. This tragic event represents a war crime, a crime against humanity. And if I want to compare, if for the massacre of Srebrenica in Bosnia region, Balkan region, sorry, 7,000 people were killed. The international community and Europe were mobilized to bring those responsible, the General Mladic and the leader politic Karadzic, to the International Tribunal in The Hague, Holland, in Netherlands, sorry. It's not so easy to understand why, for the tragic event of Khojaly, no one, again, has yet been brought to justice. But I think that the restoration of truth and justice are essential elements for an hypothetical future peace process. Armenia has invaded 20% of its neighbor territory, killed thousands of Azerbaijanis and expelled them from their home. And the people should learn the true story. I think it would be opportune to implement a continuous action of information on the reality of the fact and on what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh. Then, again, if I want to talk about the future of this region, the South Caucasus, we must talk before for what is happening. What are the reasons of this situation? I think that the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan does not start from an hypothetical separatism of Nagorno-Karabakh or discrimination or of minority or regional economic difficulties, but from territorial claim and expansion plan of Armenia implemented through a military occupation of Azeri territory. Because we must remember that this plan began in 1988 with the USSR tolerance, followed by the 1989 decision of the Supreme Soviet of the Armenian Soviet Republic, this decision to annex the entire Nagorno-Karabakh region to Armenia. Armenia started to deport 300,000 Azerbaijan people from Armenia, where they lived 1,000 years, and then they created Shin to punish their own Armenians in Sangay city of Azerbaijan in order to accuse Azerbaijan for being intolerant country. They had the whole plan to occupy territories of Azerbaijan. And finally, this act led to serious acts of violence and the expulsion of over 1 million of Azeri people from their homeland. Of course, this event generated a continuous state of war that still persists despite short-lived ceasefire and violation. And the OSCE, the Organizzazione Sicurezza e Cooperazione Europea, sorry, the Minsk group has never achieved concrete progress in resolving the conflict. And even recently, Europe has not taken a relevant political position, maintaining a line of neutrality that sometimes appear ambiguous and contradictory. At least, as a result of 44 days of war and after 27 years of occupation, Azerbaijan liberated its own territories and brought stability. And we will see in the future prosperity to the South Caucasus region. On 10 of November 2020, last year, the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia, and the President of the Russian Federation signed a joint statement agreeing to a ceasefire, which has been strictly observed since now. But this is very important, an integral part of this statement includes the return of 1 million of refugees to their own home after 27 years of occupation, and is meant to bring at least peace, prosperity, and stability to the whole region. So too, this is very important, improving the social welfare of Armenians living in Azerbaijani territory is a top priority for the Azerbaijani government. An agreement signed by the parties on 11 of January this year lists all economic and infrastructure blocked between Armenia and Azerbaijan, plans to build new road through Azerbaijan, will develop Armenia's infrastructure at the regional level with the joint development project to be implemented for Armenians and Azerbaijanis. And I think that in this framework, I think that there are all the conditions to write a new page of history in this region. It's my opinion that international community should refrain any provocation which may harm stability and peace in the region. But the international community, the European Union, should support territorial integrity of Azerbaijan and help in the reconstruction, the mining and the return of internally displaced people to their home. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for your remarks and these insights, and also for this note of optimism in a way, in terms of a future that is moving past these events and towards something durable that can prevent future tensions, clashes, and future.
I hope you understand what I mean. I'm sorry again for my bad English. Okay?
Absolutely, without a question. And your insights were very clear and very, very helpful.
Thank you.
And now I'm moving on to Mr. Raul Contreras, who has written a book about Khojaly, and would very much like to hear his insights, how he ended up being involved in this matter, and what he's learned, and what his thoughts about the present and the future.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Raul Lowry Contreras. And yes, I have written a book about Khojaly. The title of it is Murder in the Mountains. And I interviewed 2 women that were taken prisoner. Plus I printed or published a number of affidavits that were given to the Azerbaijani government at the time by people who were there, either in Khojaly or in Agdam shortly thereafter, which Agdam is just a few miles away from Khojaly down the mountains, and that's where the people went for safety. Agdam today is a host city that used to have 50,000 people and has 0 people today. So yes, Khojaly, February 26, 1992. I have to tell you that as an American in 1992, I had no idea that this had happened. I had no idea. I had very few ideas or views of Azerbaijan, as a matter of fact. I knew it was north of Iran and south of Russia. I knew that the Russians had occupied part of Iran at the end of World War II, and they were based in Baku. So I had a little bit of knowledge, but as I researched this book, I found out a lot about it, and I have been there to Azerbaijan a number of times now, and I think I know it well. I've been on the Russian border, I've been on the Iranian border, I've been on the line of conflict. I remember in one of the towns that was recaptured in 2016 when there was some combat. I looked down the newly rebuilt village on the streets, and down at the end of the street, I saw a big barricade and all kinds of wording, which I was told was danger, do not cross. And I said, why? And they said, because on the other side are Armenians. Now, we were well within Azerbaijani territory as recognized by the international community, by over 100 nations. We were about 100 kilometers inside Azerbaijan, yet 200 yards, 200 meters down the road, there was a barrier that said danger because there were Armenians on the other side. I said, well, what would happen if I walked down there waving my passport, yelling, I'm an American, I'm an American, I'm an American, and the head of the village, the political leader looked at me and said, they would shoot you. That's how the situation has been for 26 years, since 1994, when the ceasefire was agreed to that ended the first Karabakh War, that postponed the war. As we know, as the distinguished gentleman just said, on September 27th, combat broke out again in the area. The Armenians blame the Azerbaijanis blame the Armenians. One thing that should be noted, and this was what I noticed for the first time in this conflict that's been going on for 30 years. The first time ever, the national and international observers and press all referred to the combat as having occurred or occurring on Azerbaijani national territory, on territory recognized by the world as Azerbaijan. All the fighting was going on in Azerbaijan's territory. Yes, there were Armenian soldiers and the Armenian army involved. There's no question about that, fighting on Azerbaijani territory. Every public release of information, press releases and press conferences were held in Yerevan by the Armenian army about the combat 200 or 300 kilometers away, whatever the distance is. And so for the first time, the world was able to see that the Armenians were totally responsible for the combat, for the occupation of Azerbaijan, not only in the Nagorno-Karabakh area, which is the size, by the way, if no one knows, but the size of the state of Delaware in the United States. And you look up on a map, that's where President Biden comes from. It's a substantial piece of real estate and mostly mountainous. Nagorno-Karabakh means black garden, according to Thomas DeWall, a famous scholar from the Carnegie the Carnegie organization. And before I forget, I have to tell you that watching the preface here, what we are doing today was that film by Thomas Goldson. I have to tell you that the first thing that I did when I started to research my book, Murder in the Mountains, is I found Azerbaijan diary, by Thomas Goltz, who happened to be the only American journalist in the area when the war broke out in 1990, well, a little bit before 1992. And his book, which is about this thick, was absolutely excellent, absolutely excellent. And I was able to document that, in fact, he had written articles as a stringer, as a freelancer, for the Washington Post. The New York Times ran an article. The London Times, that he worked for, also ran an article about Khojaly. At the time, that was the only mention of what actually happened and his experience there. First of all, he'd been to Khojaly before. He knew people there. He recognized people there. They recognized him when he arrived on the scene of the massacre the day after. The bodies were still there, frozen, because it was that cold in the mountains. And his observations from an American standpoint were actually published. Time Magazine published an article, all this within days. And yet, the Armenians in Washington, D.C., in the Armenian National Committee of America, ANCA, A-N-C-A, they were able to convince editors in Washington, D.C., that in fact, the Azerbaijanis had attacked, and that they even relayed information that it was Azerbaijani internal forces that actually did the massacre in order to make the Armenians look bad. Editors in Washington actually believed that stuff, and they put it in, and despite the fact that the only real report they had was from Thomas Goltz and French journalists who were there. And of course, the photojournalist that we saw a few minutes ago, who did excellent work. And I know what he experienced in Paris when his artwork or his work was defaced, and he was bitterly attacked by the Armenian community in France. I know, because the same thing has happened to me here in the United States. They promptly, after my first article about Azerbaijan, they promptly named me a member of the Armenian Hall of Shame. And I'm very proud of that, by the way. Now, in the book, I mentioned, and in articles that I've written, and this is very important. Armenia has a national military hero named Monty Melkonian, who was born here in California, educated at the University of California, Berkeley, and then went to Iran to do graduate study and became a terrorist. He went to Lebanon and was a murder for hire assassin. And he trained other assassins. And he was paid to kill Christians. That's what the combat was in Lebanon at the time, Muslims and Christians. He then wound up in Armenia, where he was commissioned in the army of Armenia. Monty Melkonian, Californian, American citizen, fighting for Armenia. And he became a national hero. They have named the military academy in Armenia as the Melkonian Academy. He was involved in all this combat. His brother wrote a book, and this is where we get really good information. If you're seeking information, you should get Melkonian's book, because he very carefully wrote through his brother's eyes information that his brother gathered and passed on to his brother. Monty Melkonian described the Armenian fighters on the night of Khojaly's massacre, February 26, 1982, how they took their knives out of their sheaths and attacked women and children, stabbing them hundreds of times. There are reports, Thomas Goltz wrote about it, that there was scalping. They were taking scalps as souvenirs. You know what scalping is? They cut off the top of the head so they could have a souvenir of hair. And this is in great detail in Melkonian's book. So this is not anti-Armenian propaganda. This is Armenian information relayed by Armenians to the world. So Khojaly was totally an illicit adventure of Armenian irregulars and Russian troops, a regimental motorized column of Russian troops that assisted the Armenian terrorists. Remember, the Armenians did not have a formal army at the time. They wore red or armbands or blue, depending on what unit they were in. And they were all in civilian clothes. By definition, ladies and gentlemen, that is a terrorist, an enemy combatant. They're not soldiers. They're not soldiers or Marines or sailors in uniform representing their country with badges of their national flag. And I know this because I did that for 8 years. I wore the uniform of the United States and with the flag occasionally, depending on which uniform I was wearing. And I know how a soldier or how a professional works and exists and goes from day to day with command and control in charge. Terrorists don't have that situation, nor do they have that protection in the Geneva Convention. Enemy combatants are defined as terrorists. They're not in uniform. They don't rely on orders from a central command. They aren't organized. And so they terrorize as individuals. And that's what Melkonian describes in his book. These people were going around cutting people up with knives after they shot them. And if they were still alive after they were shot, they were then killed by knives. Okay, enough of the past. We've heard the witness and what have you, but let's talk about what's going on now. As everyone knows, September 27th, combat broke out again. And it ended November 10th with a ceasefire signed by the Prime Minister of Armenia, the President of Azerbaijan, and the Vice Premier, I think it was, of the Russian Federation. And in that agreement, which was essentially a surrender document, Armenia lost this war. There is not an objective person in the world that can say that Armenia even maintained the status quo. We don't have the status quo in there anymore because the Azerbaijani military was able to occupy territory that they had lost in 1992 that had been run from Armenia by proxies. They called it a republic of some kind, but no country in the world recognized it. Even Armenia didn't recognize it. And anyone that lived there, if they wanted to travel to Italy or the United States or what have you, had to get an Armenian passport. So, and in 2015, let me wind up the history lesson here. In 2015, the European Court of Human Rights issued a unanimous decision. There were several lawsuits involved that wound up at the Court of Human Rights. And the court unanimously ruled that Armenia was 100% responsible for all the combat, for all the aggressiveness, and all the occupation of all these years, and for ethnic cleansing, for chasing almost 1 million people out of their homes into Azerbaijan, which is a totally different subject. And I've met with many of these people. They're called IDPs, internal displaced persons, and they're wonderful. I went to the first village and of the first compound, and there were hundreds of them there waiting, treated me like a really important person. And through interpreters, I talked to these people, and you know, they all had one thing to say: help us go home. Now, I know what it's like to be born in one country and raised in another, so I know what going home means. And in this case, they were chased out by military forces. Okay, November 10th comes. Armenia loses the war. A large chunk of real estate, Azerbaijan's real estate, is now occupied by Azerbaijan troops. And because Azerbaijan is a wealthy country that has done well, does better with better oil prices, but it's done well. And they've been very good at investing, saving and investing. And what they've done is announced a rebuilding of the newly occupied territory of Azerbaijan that has been under Armenian control since 1992 and 1994. They're going to build whole new towns. They're going to build railroads, roads. They're going to bring the modern 2021 economy that Azerbaijan is a very substantial member of back into the Nagorno-Karabakh area and the formerly occupied areas around Nagorno-Karabakh. And I've likened it to the Marshall Plan. With the end of World War II, the United States stepped forth and offered to rebuild Europe that had been devastated by the Second World War. And they pumped several $1 billion into Europe, American money. These were not loans. These were expenditures, investments in helping the Europeans get back on their feet, because the whole continent had been torn apart and demolished. Well, that's what happened here in the Karabakh. The Armenians did nothing to improve it because they don't have the resources. They just let it sit there. And these people, you know, they chopped wood and they grew some grapes, but they didn't do anything that had been done before the Armenian occupation. The economy of the Karabakh region just pummeled. It was pummeled by the occupation, and no progress was made into the 21st century. But now the Azerbaijanis are actually in there now building roads, starting a railroad to connect the two parts of Azerbaijan that are separated by Armenia. And the Armenians are benefiting because now they're going to get a direct rail link to Russia, their #1 trading partner. And the railroads are going to be running between the two countries because Turkey is involved in all this too. And this is important because Armenia has very little in the way of natural resources. They are land bound. They have no ports because they aren't on the Black Sea. They aren't on the Caspian Sea. They aren't on any waterway, which is essential in this modern world. Not only that, for example, the Azerbaijan's railroad system was expanded last year or the year before, and now you can and this is actually happening, you can take a train, a freight train from China down through and into Azerbaijan, around the Caspian Sea, and on to Europe without touching an inch of Russian territory. Now, that also allows people, countries like India, to ship by ship to the sea that Iran has their ports on, and they can unload there in those ports by railroad and move them straight to Europe through Azerbaijan. All this avoids Armenia. And in the case of Armenia, it would be very productive economically if some of these railroad lines and freight lines and oil pipelines of the future are built through Armenia, which is the shortest way from Azerbaijan's oil fields and natural gas fields to the Mediterranean in Turkey, where from there, the product, the oil or the natural gas can be piped or shipped to Europe. In other words, a whole new market. Remember, you have to, on a market, on a free market, you have to have product on one end and demand on the other. And then you have to get it there. And so what has happened is the Azerbaijanis have built 2 oil and gas pipelines, and they route them through Georgia and Turkey. And Armenia, because of the war situation that they were responsible for, has suffered economically because of this. Now, under this new agreement, if Armenia plays the game right, they will benefit immensely, immensely. And that will make the whole region prosper. And Azerbaijan is in the forefront of this. I have met their leaders, the economic leaders, and I was thoroughly impressed just by what they've done. And then one of the last times I was there, I saw billboards. Invest in SOCAR, the national oil company, and they were selling bonds to Azerbaijanis for the first time, so they could invest and then collect, their interest and profits from the investment. And I thought to myself, wow, that's as free enterprise as you can get. They're selling bonds to their own people for the first time, letting the individual Azerbaijanis invest in their own country. Azerbaijan oil is available all over the world. They have offices in almost every country in Africa, and they do business. So these small countries, Israel gets 40% of its oil that it needs for its economy from Azerbaijan, a Jewish state and a 95% Muslim state working together economically. And the trade goes back and forth. And this is done through Turkey. The oil is piped through Turkey and then loaded on ships and taken to Israel. This is the future, I believe. I believe this is the future of that entire region. That these countries working together, and now if Armenia wants to come in and join, they will benefit, the whole region will benefit. And that is the future that I see for the area that my interest became very, very profound a few years ago. And now it gets me, without my knowing it, invitations like for this forum because of my work. And I'm very happy that that the people are seeing my work, and I'm very proud of my work. And I look forward, when this pandemic is over, to going back to Azerbaijan, because I love Baku. If you don't know this, you will now know this. Baku is so modern and so advanced. They even have a Mexican restaurant there, and it's very good. Thank you, Irina. Thank you for this opportunity and for the pleasure of helping spread information about a region. It's very important.
Thank you so much for your comments, and actually would like to share that last year I actually joined you in the Armenian Hall of Shame, and I'm actually very proud of being there along with people like you. I also would very much like to recommend this book, The Murder in the Mountains, because I'm actually reading it now myself, and the insight that you can learn about the event place, it's worth knowing in depth, because it's one thing to it's important to share, to hear testimonies being shared. It's also important to understand what transpired behind the scenes, who were the actors, who benefits from these massacres. Nothing happens in a vacuum, as we've discovered from the events, the discussions of Black January and the articles that were produced. Nothing happens in a vacuum, and there are always actors who benefit from perpetuating conflict, from perpetuating misunderstandings, tensions between not just governments but peoples. And this is why I'm so appreciative of these comments that take the past, but also see how to break through these artificial divisions and how to create a better future where it's harder for outside parties to come in and incite conflict, incite hatred, incite mutual distrust. And I think the future is in bridge building. I think the future is in understanding common interest and not being led on by third actors that don't have anyone's best interests at heart. With that, I'm actually going to give the floor to Arzu, who will speak about her perspective as a young member of the Azerbaijani diaspora, and how does the diaspora view these events? Why do they matter to them? And what does she see as a future, someone living abroad outside the country?
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor for me to be here and to share with you the not just Azerbaijani but Azerbaijani diaspora's point of view. I cannot but speak a little about Khojaly. As you all know, 613 people killed, including 196 women and 70 elderly people. And these are words that are etched in our heads with no emotion left. Yet, behind every one of those numbers is a real tragedy, a broken life. Like when Suzanne involuntarily saved her husband's life as he was carrying her on his back to safety. The bullet came from behind and reached Suzanne instead of her husband. She died immediately. 613 people killed, including 63 children. Dr. Malik Iskandarov's daughter was only 5 years old, and she said to her father, "Dad, when everything happens, first kill me, then mommy, and then yourself." A 5-year had no place even thinking those thoughts, and yet. Statistics are not just numbers. These are human beings, children, people with full lives, future teachers, scholars, pediatricians, musicians, simply parents. I always ask myself how this atrocity could have happened, not only to Azerbaijanis, but to any human being. And I ask how other human beings could do what the Armenian bandit formations did with the help of the Russian army. Kids' eyes were scorched with cigarette butts, limbs and other human organs get amputated, heads were cut with axes, underage girls were raped. When I was interviewing a female reporter during the Karabakh War, she showed me evidence and testimonies by local doctors acknowledging that they were powerless because of the chemical weapons. Rivers were poisoned and one could not touch anything. The Khojaly genocide was an act of revenge at the cost of entirely innocent people. The revenge was invented and bolstered by Armenian nationalist forces using racist theories of genetic intolerance with Azerbaijanis. These were the exact words of Armenia's former president, Robert Kochurian, who himself participated in the Khojaly massacre, as well as other presidents, Serge Sarkisyan. And we all know his famous testimony quote. The so-called revenge ruled by Armenians that never even lived in the South Caucasus. Praised as a hero in Armenia, an international recognized terrorist, Malte Melkonyan, was described in his brother's memoir to have been so sad for being late to the bloodbath at Khojaly. It is appalling to even think that someone with Western education, who had grown up with seemingly normal values, someone as me, who called the US home, can travel as far as here just to wipe away Azerbaijanis from a small city while torturing pregnant women. Monte is a 5-minute hero made on the blood of Azerbaijanis and devastated poverty of its own people. Syria was an open wound with collective memoirs of inhuman atrocities that happened in front of the world's eyes. Trigger words like Christianity, genocide, indigenous population, ethnic cleansing, ancient lands being thrown around just to whitewash Armenia's fault from what happened on February 26, 1992. Or the intentionally mistranslated words of an Azerbaijani reporter, Chingiz Mustafayev, who showed the world fragments of the act of violence that Armenia tries so hard to whitewash now. To hide, to justify, to minimize anything except take accountability. The most shameless are the fairy tales about the corridor. I've interviewed a Khojaly survivor, and while for the whole interview, he dealt with his emotions pretty well. When I asked him about the existence of some corridor the Armenians claim to have left, he said, "How it comes, you give me 3 meters length corridor and say, if I go a step left or right, you're going to shoot me." Azerbaijan liberated not just Karabakh. Azerbaijan liberated the Armenian nation too. The burden of being landlocked with no potential or perspectives, the Armenian nation was losing day after day while a number of immoral Armenian leaders were making millions out of that land. And nothing was promised. This is a new chapter that can be written with accountability. And while we are talking about Khojaly, one must not forget about numerous crimes committed in Ardaban or Dashaltı, Karadağlı or Malibeyli. And I am devastated to say that I can continue this list. Khojaly is an apogee of what nationalism and terror can bring. This is a new chapter that can be written only with courage. Courage to say the right words, condemn all acts of violence, and put in all the forces and energy together so that nothing like this can ever happen again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arzu, for sharing these very, very powerful comments, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think the fact of how this untethering from the leadership rhetoric can help the Armenian people is something that needs to be emphasized, needs to be discussed more, and actually needs to be discussed with the Armenians themselves, even if they're not at the current juncture open to necessarily discussions. To the extent it's possible, one-on-one, maybe this sentiment should be discussed about their future, about getting past the hatred, and about getting past being led on into completely immoral and dangerous actions taken by the government. It's indeed a future of the entire region that is at stake here, and not just Azerbaijan. And that is something that people trying to attack events like this one fail to note. This is not just about a narrative or even grief of one group of people. It's about the fact that what happens in one place affects everyone else, even if they don't realize. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and that's something that everyone should keep in mind, no matter how they feel about the conflict who they think is right or what type of propaganda and from whom they happen to be listening to. That's something worth recalling. And with that in mind, I actually want to bring that point by giving the floor to Javier Medina Ortiz. He's a Spanish lawyer. He's the founder of the Azerbaijan House in Spain. And he's also someone who has a very interesting perspective because of the parallels and contacts he noticed between the Armenians and the role of the Catalonian separatists, secessionists, who had sided with Armenia during the conflict and who were also quite involved in disinformation propaganda about the conflict using very similar themes. And this sort of international globalization of conflicts and this interconnection between different issues is worth emphasizing because similar matters, similar processes are at play in both cases. That's why we cannot really ignore what's going on anywhere. It can affect us where we least expect.
Thank you very much. This is Javier Medina. I'm from Barcelona. I'm a lawyer. And for me, it's very, very important to be here with you. Firstly, I want to apologize my bad English too, because I always speak usually in Spanish or in Catalonian, in our language, but I try to do it in English. I want to ask for my colleagues that speak Spanish that if I don't speak so good English, or I need some translation, that they can do it. Firstly, I want to give a big greet to all the people from Azerbaijan, and I want to congratulate all the people from Azerbaijan about the great victory and the great future that they open for this big country. Okay, and I want to give my solidarity to the victims of the war and the victims of the COVID. In this moment, it's a pandemic in all the world, and I think that is the same in Azerbaijan. As you said just a minute, I opened the Casa Azerbaijan in Spain 5 years ago. My first action was in the 25th anniversary from the massacre of Khojaly. We show in this moment the Endless Corridor film, and we did an event here in Barcelona who was shared in all the medias and the main newspapers here. But this is an exception here. As you said, I remember a few minutes ago, someone said about nobody recognizes Nagorno-Karabakh in the international areas in different countries, except in Catalonia. We had a very big trouble since 5 years ago with the secessionists from the Catalonian parties, and the only support was with the Armenian in political international. Okay, it was a mutual support, strange, but it was this situation, and we still in this moment are living this mutual support. For instance, in the last days, in the war days, so many cities and parliament, and the local parliament of Catalonia was supporting expressly the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, Armenian role there. Okay, and this is the constant situation here. Why? It's very, very hard and very long to explain, because it's more because the Catalonian recent history reasons, but in this moment we are still now in this situation. For me, I'm a lawyer, I'm a jurist. I want to explain my point of view about this trouble. for me, it's curious and it's difficult to understand why the people say that, for instance, Azerbaijan is the aggressor. Azerbaijan take all the reason from the international institution who can give the reason to one or the other part is the ONU, the United Nations. Okay, the United Nations gave, I remember, 4 or 5 resolutions about this, and this is the judge, and this is the sentence, and this is the judgment. Okay, if you don't like it, it's your problem, but you must to be civilized and you must to go where you must go. After this, you have a resolution. I think the next step is going to execute this resolution. I think that Azerbaijan has a lot of patience because it was waiting for 30 years the Minsk group actions for nothing. How much time must Azerbaijan wait? Do you remember, I think, was the case of Ethiopia before the First World War, when Italian invades Ethiopia. In this moment, Ethiopia gone to the Sociedad de Naciones, I can explain in English, and goes there with the emperor and give a very hard and a very celebrate speech there, but without results. Why? Because they have not power to impose the reason. I think that in this moment, Azerbaijan did the correct and with an proportional use of the power. Why? Because after 44 days winning the war, and after this, Azerbaijan in the best position was agreed to take the peace. In opposite, where was the demonstrations on the street was in Armenian, because a great part of the people wants to continue with the war. So it's funny that how is possible that Azerbaijan appears always like an aggressor when use the the legal reasons, use the power with proportion, and stop the war when it was very easy for Azerbaijan goes to the finish. So in this moment, I think that Azerbaijan is in the best position for win not only this war, for with the future. But I think that Azerbaijan must win the media's war. The media's war in Spain, the media's war in Catalonia is not a victory for Azerbaijan. And in this way, we must to do a lot of work. Why? Because if we don't win this media's work, it's difficult to give investors there. The investors want to do money, wants to do business, but they want to go to a place, an area who is comfortable. If you are here, for instance, in Catalonia or in Spain, and you are all the day hearing that Armenia is a very good country with human rights, always the victim, and Azerbaijan is the opposite, it's difficult to convince the people to go there. This war must be went to from Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan must take profit to this moment, because Azerbaijan is for me, the bigger and the most, with the most future country in this area, sure. But we must to show here in Catalonia or in Spain. Remember that Monty Milconian, after leave California, came to Spain, and in his own words, here curiously he takes the conscience about Armenian here. So here the Armenian pressure is very, very hard. Perhaps some people can think that this man is talking only with local focused, perhaps, but think that in a global world, sometimes the local trouble is the big trouble. Why? Because in the Nagorno-Karabakh war days, there is two interventions in the European Parliament for condemned Azerbaijan. Both of them was from the secessionist Catalonian parliaments in the European Parliament, and so this is my think about this. I'm so sorry about my English. Perhaps of course, I can do it better in Spanish, but I think that more or less I can explain my idea about this.
This was actually great and very clear. Thank you so much for your comments. And actually, all the speakers today touched on the issue of communicating both the personal experiences, the geopolitical implications, and the accurate information about the conflict and about the potential for a better future. The difficulties that we are facing is the amount of disinformation, misinformation. One is deliberate and one is out of ignorance or just having no access to correct information. To the information warfare is being fought by governments, to lack of skills in communicating it in a way that breaks through the noise in Western media and international media, all sorts of political agendas coloring the way these issues have been covered. I'd like to turn to the speakers with that question. What do you think is the best method of reaching public hearts and minds when there are so many resources being dedicated to overwhelming with noise, with narratives, rather than with accurate information, with a positive message of building bridges, of overcoming these conflicts, of understanding, of bringing perpetrators to justice, but also not perpetuating tensions? How do you break through the fact that there are entities, lobbies, groups who are fundraising off of that, who are dedicating resources specifically to promoting narratives, to entrenching the conflict? What do you do to reach people directly and around these issues? I'd like to ask that of everyone. What are your thoughts about that from your experiences?
In my case, I think that in Spain we have a very difficult trouble with this because here the Armenian people it's in the second or third generation. So it's people perfectly organized and people who is most of them with the Spanish nationality. They speak Spanish or they speak Catalonian too. In opposite, here in Catalonia, there are so few people from Armenia, young people who is only for a short time, and it's difficult to fight in number because I think that in this moment in Catalonia there is more or less 8,000 Armenian people. But if you count second generations or third generations, it's more people. And in this moment from Azerbaijan, there is only, I think, 200 people only. It's difficult to fight. So the only way is with a lobby work. Lobby work needs money, of course, like everywhere, and do it every day, and of course an official support. But But of course, it's difficult. But I think that we must do it if we want to make Azerbaijan like the country that the Spanish or that the Catalonian people needs to know. Because in this moment we are absolutely very, very far from this. For instance, I was sometimes or each time alone defending like Spanish Azerbaijan in newspapers and in medias, and it's difficult. This is my opinion. I have not a magic stick, okay?
Of course. And Raul, what are your thoughts from your experience? What's the best way to reach the public and to break through huge investments made by lobbyists with ulterior motives? And the motive is not to resolve the problem, but to perpetuate it, obviously, because propaganda is not a way to resolve any conflict. One-sided attacks on somebody, accusations, that's not a solution. That's perpetuation, in my opinion.
Well, the thing is that for the past 30 plus years, the Armenians have controlled information from the area. That is because of the Armenian diaspora, with large populations of Armenians in Russia. Actually, there's more Armenians in Russia than there are in Armenia today. France, in Paris, and in the United States, particularly in California, in Southern California, where there's approximately 300,000 or 400,000 of them here in Los Angeles County alone. Los Angeles County has 10 million people in it, which coincidentally is the number of people that live in Azerbaijan. And a lot of people are not aware of that. So the Armenians have had the playing field all to themselves. They're very aggressive. When I first started paying attention to the area, they would respond with such vigor and numbers that there were publications that I regularly contributed to, the publications that paid me to write articles, that they told me I couldn't write any more about Azerbaijan and the situation, because every time they published an article of mine, that they would receive hundreds of letters and emails and phone calls complaining. And so editors, publishers, they don't want to fool around with this. So the Armenians were very successful at keeping anything positive about Azerbaijan under cover. And only the war that we just finished has broken through that silence, or that enforced silence. Because I don't know if our international viewers right now are think this way, but here in America, everybody loves a winner. Mm-hmm. And there are two things that came out of this war. Number one, that the recognition in almost every publication I saw, regardless of the country, regardless of who wrote it, actually stated that this entire conflict was fought on Azerbaijan territory. That's the first time, I think, in my research that it has been basically a unanimous view or fact published worldwide. Number two, so there was that. And then the fact is that all of the propaganda that came out of Armenia was proven false. The Syrian jihadists who were taken, according to rumor, from Syria to Azerbaijan to fight. But the Armenians have never produced. Where are the people? Where are their prisoners that they took who are Syrian jihadists? There aren't any. But we do know that there are prisoners born in Syria that are Armenian that have been captured, that were there fighting, and they are not citizens even Armenia. We go back to the winning the war. As I explained to anybody that will listen to me, Americans know what it's like to be proud of winning a war. We won World War II basically by ourselves with help from other countries, but basically it was a United States victory in both the Asia and in Europe. And every American was proud of that. Every single American was proud of it. Now, I lived through that. I was alive then. But then came the Korean War, which was a stalemate and which has been basically forgotten. And then the Vietnam War, which was not a stalemate, which essentially the United States lost. And Americans don't like to lose anything. And so people are very critical of that war. Had we won the war and there'd be no communist Vietnam today, everybody would have been happy. That's the situation I see that is in the way of Azerbaijan getting good publicity, or that's what the situation was. But I believe that has turned now to some extent. I wrote an article when it happened, during the war, that surprised me because a couple of days later it popped up, it was published in Turkey. I mean, it really surprised me. But they were interested in an American viewpoint of the situation, which normally no one would pay any attention to. But in this case, they were paying attention because everything the Armenians said turned out to be false. It was the old Baghdad Bob thing from Iraq, the Iraq War. Remember, the Americans were entering Baghdad, and Baghdad Bob, the propaganda minister for Saddam Hussein, was claiming that the Americans were being thrown off the beaches in the Arabian Gulf. And it was funny because the Americans, the army was coming in from one from the north, and the Marines were coming in from the south. And Baghdad Bob was just telling the world just the opposite. And that's exactly what happened here. Armenia was saying one thing, and the opposite situation was actually occurring on the ground. And Azerbaijan was smart this time. They allowed the international press in, and Amnesty International and all kinds of NGOs to come in and see what was actually going on. And that's why the New York Times had a huge article about Armenian bombing of Ganja, which was a long way from the combat. And so the situation changed. The Armenian diaspora was no longer in charge of the information coming out of the region. International journalists, French, British, Americans, and others were in the area, and they were allowed by the Azerbaijan government to report what they saw. And what they saw was totally the opposite of what was coming out of Armenian press conferences. So I think the tide has turned, and maybe not in Spain. I can understand why Catalonia supported the Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians. Perfectly understandable. Catalonia has the same situation in Spain today. And so, yeah, that's understandable. But around the world, I believe, because I do Google search every day of these things, and I see articles from India, from Asia, from Latin America that are very objective for the first time.
Excuse me. I'm absolutely agree. I want to focalize two items. For me, the main difference between the Armenian people who is living here from the Azerbaijan people who is living here is that the Armenian people is really immigrants. It's poor people who wants to come to Europe or Spain to remain. The Azerbaijan people who is living here in Barcelona in this moment is usually students. They don't want to be for all the life in Spain. Okay, they want to be here for do the university or similar and return. And so the way to influence in the Spanish or the Catalonian society is very different because the Armenians want to be here, and they perhaps in second generation or first generation, but for always. Another thing is how how is the business that they want to do here. And this is another problem, okay? But it's different. About the medias in Spain, I want to say you a very important thing, that the first media group in Spain was bought 3 months ago from Armenian man, who in his website say about himself that he is an Armenian activist. So if the first newspaper in Spain and if the first radio station in Spain is in Armenian hands, it's difficult to do something against this. Of course, the only way is to show the truth to the people. Believe me, I try to do it every day, and I write some articles there, and I was threatened from Armenian people here in Spain, me and my family.
And actually, that brings me to Irina. I wanted to ask him, how do European officials and people, analysts, people in the political circles, what kind of presentation is the most effective for them? Is it personal stories? Is it visual presentation, photographs? Is it articles? Is it studies, research studies? What in your experience has been the most effective measure of conveying information and breaking through fake news, so to speak, of all?
If I know to do exactly, perhaps I will be rich in 2 months, but it's difficult to explain. Here in Spain, we have two different points of view. The Catalonian point of view was absolutely with Armenia, because I wrote an old article in the first days said the strange and illegal parallelism between Armenian and Catalonian secessionists, because they want to be in the same position, because they think that self-determination, referendum, similar things. But it was only in Catalonia, perhaps a little bit too in the Basque Country. Spain was absolutely against Armenia, not against Armenia, was with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan in the first days with the secessionist process take a communication to Spain, appointing Spain in this problem, and this was very, very good for the Spain government. Okay, how to change this? Difficult to explain. I think that in Catalonia, the only way, in my opinion, is because it's impossible to fight in number. For instance, Armenian people convocate a manifestation, okay, a demonstration. Perhaps it comes, for instance, I am a lawyer of the Turkish consulate in Barcelona too, okay. They have weekly one manifestation in the consulate Turkish from the Armenian people. It's impossible from the Azerbaijan people fight in this way, because they can mobilize in each week perhaps 800 people, 500 people, 1,000 people in each week. It's difficult to be like Azerbaijan people in Barcelona against this. They try to do it. There is here a very active the Azerbaijan society in Barcelona, but it's very, very difficult. They are young people for 2-3 years. Okay, in my opinion, the only way it's open and consulate here. Barcelona is the third city in the world with more consulates. Okay. Open a consulate here who has a very strong and close relationship with the authorities, with the Spanish authorities and with the Catalonian authorities, to show them the truth. Because if you are here every day hearing only the Armenian is victim, the Armenian is victim, the Armenian is victim, and nobody goes there to show another truth, it's very difficult to change this. And in my opinion, we are Catalonian, we like business, we like money, and we must to show that Azerbaijan is the future, not Armenian. It's a file country, a file economy without future. The future is Azerbaijan, and be sure that if we can show this to the Catalonian authorities, to the Catalonian officials, we can change this point of view. It's my opinion.
Those are excellent insights from a diplomatic, from a business perspective. You know, addressing the issues of actual interest versus propaganda. I think that's actual value. That's really valuable, and I really hope that Azerbaijan will hear what you're saying, because this is the kind of push that's needed now. Aggressive, assertive diplomacy in both private and public relations. And actually, that brings me to, I wanted to ask a question from Irina Tsukerman briefly. His perspective as someone who's worked with European officials, has that approach been traditionally working? Is there a clash between just basically propaganda and substantive engagement, and what works better?
Excuse me, I can understand.
The question was I wanted to ask Irina Tsukerman, one of the speakers.
Can you say in Spanish?
No. I wanted to ask Mr. Irina Tsukerman.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Excuse me.
Tell me.
I wanted to ask your perspective as someone who has worked with European officials. What your experience, what has worked for them? Has this sort of diplomacy interest been better at overcoming propaganda and essentially cash infusions into political sphere? Or do you think that ultimately propaganda works best because it's so easy? What in your opinion has been the most successful approach in working with the European officials in bringing?
I try to answer for what I understand. I can say only that I can speak about my experience to see. I have just seen in what happened in Brussels, because I have just worked 35 years there in Brussels and Strasbourg. So, and what's about happen in Euronest, in this organism that political organism, there was a strong lobby. There was a strong lobby, Armenian strong lobby, and I didn't understand. I didn't understand why many members of European Parliament was close to Armenian position. The moment in which the responsibility of Armenia was very clear, and I remember that there was a resolution against Azerbaijan, against Azerbaijan without reason, absolutely. And for this reason, the delegation of Azerbaijan, for one moment, close on every relationship, political relationship with the European Parliament. There is a moment in which in Euronest, Azerbaijan has retired, I don't know, take away his delegation. And what's happened? It's happened that Armenia has made a big, a strong machine of propaganda. propaganda. And for this reason, I think that now is the moment in which it's needed to put a strong mechanism to show really what's happening. Not only in, but I think most important in Europe, in each country, to show really exactly what's happened, what has been the history of Nagorno-Karabakh, what has been the history of Azerbaijan, what will be the Azerbaijan for the future, what represent a particular nation in this area. The only one nation, country that is projected to the future. If we look, this is very important. And I think that the most important, I think that the Italian people is very sensible, is feel to be very close to the Azerbaijan, and we have many common interest with Azerbaijan. I want to remember that in Italy, in the part south of Italy, there will be the terminal of the pipeline coming from Azerbaijan. So we have a strong connection with this country, economic, most I think also cultural. So for this reason, I think that this is the moment in which a strong information field could put the real truth in evidence in Europe.
But what do you think it takes to create that? What specifically is effective in conveying that information? Is it direct engagement with the officials? Is it trips to Azerbaijan for more for the business community? Is it just greater presence of Azerbaijanis in the information sphere?
What do you mean? What is the way to forward this information? What do you mean? What is the best way for this information? But I think there are many ways for give an image of Azerbaijan as a modern country projected for the future, where there is no real difference between Europe and Azerbaijan. I've been only once in Baku in delegation in the delegation of European Parliament, and for me has been a surprise. For example, it has been a feeling, but in Baku, I feel to be I don't know, more Europe in Baku than in the same Europe, maybe. So this has been a feeling very, very important. So to project in Europe this image of this country, where in the government, the government is made, there is intelligent person who can put together the heritage of this country with the vision of modernity. This is very important. This is very important. So for this reason, I don't know, there are many with the exhibition, in the media, I don't know, but to give this image of this country that is not a country in the far Caucasian region, I don't know where exactly, but it's a more and more close to us. Or maybe Azerbaijan is closer to Europe, or Europe is closer to Azerbaijan. Okay, this is very important. This is very important. It is my feeling, but it's a feeling of most of people, of all economic operator, Italian economic operator who coming back in Italy speaking of Azerbaijan or as a new country, modern country, exactly. So I think this is the best way, and this is the best moment.
Thank you so much for your perspective. I wanted to turn to Arzu very briefly and ask her about her perspective. As a member of the American Azerbaijani diaspora, what have you found to be the most effective way of reaching hearts and minds, engaging people about perspective, whether in Khojaly or anything related to the region and its future? What do you think is the way to move forward, especially from as a young woman, as a young person who maybe is from a different generation? What do you think is the best way from your experience?
Well, first of all, I want to highlight that the Armenian and Azerbaijani interaction in the Karabakh War just shows exactly where we, as a whole community, have gaps. And I am more than sure that the US should be a pioneer in identifying and putting the responsibility for all the hate speech, for all the threats, all the death threats that I personally receive on a daily basis. I keep on, reminded that I live in California. Armenian nationalists keep on taking my school where I study and where I used to teach American students. So, we have a lot of gaps as a community overall. Coming to fake news, at some point I just realized there is no point on interaction with, this toxic diaspora members who are just haters. And when you come to them with the facts, and when you come to them at least with a personal story, they just I don't know, completely distort your words. I am from Karabakh. I am a refugee, a former refugee. My family was ethnically cleansed from the Karabakh region for 28 years. I am 28 years, and I visited Karabakh for the first time last year after the Liberation War. And it's, putting that personal story into perspective and just proofreading, basing every word of yours into the facts and communicating not just with those haters, but with international media. For example, we had instances of absolutely biased, absolutely one-sided articles from The Guardian. And at the same time, we had articles of the same Guardian from 1992, when they were writing stories about Azerbaijanis being, cleansed, being shot in the woods, Azerbaijanis frozen to death, Azerbaijanis not having any place to escape. So when you show this, comparison, and these are the facts, and these are the everything that happened to Azerbaijanis. How comes that you changed your whole perspective and put in those people who were ethnically cleansed and brutally killed as occupiers in this war? I am personally with an incredible team of volunteers, of copywriters, of translators, journalists. We work on the website that collects all the material, both about Azerbaijan and Armenia, as well as the Karabakh conflict. And I just, it's not just for Azerbaijanis or for Armenians. I really hope that this website, which is called Caucasus Record, will be, a source point for international scholars who want to learn both sides, not just the propaganda, not just biased, one-sided information. There are always two sides. During the 44 days of war, we were shouting, but the main message I was pushing: you don't have to support Azerbaijan. No one wants you to support Azerbaijan. But you must support justice, and you must listen to both sides of the conflict. There's never just one side. There are always two sides. And when you just turn a blind eye on someone, praising, hearing all these loud words, it's not just the way it works. And Azerbaijani community, Azerbaijani refugees, almost 1 million of Azerbaijani refugees, including me and my family, we felt this, cold attitude from international media. But as you said, from a new generation, I totally blame ourselves. It's totally our fault. But as I've said about the gap on hate speech, on all the death threats, I see these gaps for our own community. And with this website, with an incredible team of volunteers, I tried to close that gap. And I think that's what is needed from every and each of us, identifying the gaps and just, working on eliminating if it's possible.
Thank you so much for your comments, and I hope you share the link to the website. Actually, what I wanted to mention is that Republic Underground, in partnership with Diaspora, we are running a network of writers, journalists, called the Caucasus Journalist Network. We'd love everyone here to contribute, to join the network, if only for discussion, but also for contributing and for helping bring a stronger network of scholars, writers, journalists exchanging ideas about the region, not just about a conflict or about that particular different things, relationships with the other countries, with the US, with the Europe, the diaspora activities, culture, potential for the future, overcoming these gaps in current information, creating networks that will help us highlight that as well. So I really hope all of you can join us, and you can message me, email me directly, or my partner Benjamin Minick. Afterwards, we can add you to the WhatsApp group. We can share our future events that are specifically for the Caucasus Network. And I hope we can work together in creating something of value, not just to one particular issue, but globally as a community of people interested in the region. I am hoping that's the step that can help us address the issues we've discussed today, moving from tragedy, acknowledging, learning, understanding tragedy, to communicating about it, to building bridges, overcoming the issues that led to it, and building a better future. It's a process, it's a long, difficult process, but we can also have fun doing it. I'd like to thank all our guests for their valuable time and for the very insightful discussion. And I really hope to hear from all of you in the future about these and many other issues. There's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to talk about. We're addressing very challenging topics, emotional topics, and it's not easy. There's challenges with the media environment, with the trolls, with the attacks. But you know what? The fact that we've been able to come together, have an open discussion, exchange views, exchange perspectives, to learn from one another, I think that's an incredible achievement. I'm very excited and I'm very optimistic about the future. And thank you once again, and I hope to see you very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.